This video is going to be about a new method for linking attitudes and identity, and most likely many of you are familiar with linear methods like dividing people into the left-right spectrum and then having a distribution of the Democrats, the distribution of the Republicans, etc. Today's method actually is going to be very different from this because actually we will rely on network theory and item response theory. And don't worry, I know a lot of people get scared by this because usually this presentation have a lot of math, but don't worry, this presentation is 100% math free. So today we will discuss how we can obtain an image like this, a network like this, what actually means, why it is rich of information, and exactly actually what this network is telling us. This video is based on a presentation I gave really recently at SPS 2021. This was the title of the presentation, and this work actually is based, this presentation is based on the work I'm doing with my colleague Adrian Luders and Michael Quayle, and I'm Dino Carpentras. Very quickly about this channel, here we discuss social complexity. We have very different videos, from very general videos for everyone to more technical videos, mostly for researchers interested in social complexity, or even researchers which are more advanced and so more technical details about social complexity. Some videos like this one would mostly focus on my research. For example, this is even a presentation on my research. And my research at the moment is focusing mostly on network-based analysis of attitudes, like today's video, and agent-based modeling. If you're interested in any of these, feel free to navigate through the channel. Hope you will enjoy. This work received fundings from the Marie Curie Individual Fellowship and the European Research Council, and that's it with the introduction. So let's jump into how our method works and what actually our method is. So these are not real data, but it's just an example to understand what we are doing. So let's suppose we have a population, and within this population we find some regularities. For example, we find that people who are negative about abortion tend also to be positive about country music. And people who are positive about abortion also tend to be positive about gay rights. And again, we are throwing away a ton of information just for making a very simple example. The main idea here is that we can create some similarity links. So some links between these concepts in such a way that we show that these two concepts, like disliking abortion and liking country music, tend to appear together in the same person. So if one person dislikes abortion, there is also a pretty decent probability that they will be positive or they will like country music. And another important thing is we can also estimate the thickness or the strength of this link. So for example, this first link might be weak, while this other link might be quite strong, which means that people who are positive about abortion almost all the time are also positive about gay rights, while people who are negative about abortion only sometimes like country music. As you might understand, this is pretty much a measurement of correlation. And actually we are doing by measuring correlation. So something which is important to stress at the moment is that actually, since this method is based on item response theory, every node, every disk you will see in this presentation is not an item, but an item response. So for example, one node here might be abortion should be legal, strongly agree, or maybe abortion should be legal, strongly disagree. Each one of these is a different node, even if they belong to the same item. Also, sometimes I will refer to to item responses as attitudes, because actually our method eventually works also with something different than item responses, but don't worry, this is too much. So just sometimes I will refer to them as attitudes. That's the only important thing. Another important feature of our method is actually it is able to estimate distance from the strength of the links. So this means that, for example, if two attitudes are strongly linked, so if one is present, also the other one tend to be present, they will appear very close in our representation. While if the link is weak, they will start appearing more far apart. And the weaker the relationship, the more far apart they will appear. In some cases, you might even have negative relationship. We won't show graphically this, but you will see them as really far apart. So this actually generates clusters. Why does it generate clusters? Because, again, these are not real data, these are just examples. Suppose you have some items on political attitudes, you might have then the generation of the Democrat cluster, the neutral cluster, and the Republican cluster. And each cluster here represents the fact that if you select, for example, one of the blue item responses, then you are also very likely to select the other two. So if you strongly agree that abortion is important, then most likely you also strongly agree on the fact that gay rights are important, etc. You might be neutral on some of these, but the relationship is not that strong. This is why you have this distance in between. And if you select some of the blue, it's even less likely that you are going to select some of the red ones. So if you think that abortion is important, gay rights is important, then probably you're not going to select that women's rights are definitely not important. So you will stay most likely here in the blue area, a little less likely in the gray area, and even less likely in the red area. And this is, of course, is true also for the rest. If you start selecting the red ones, you most likely stay in this area. So we tested our method on real data. We selected 402 Americans. We asked them several things, but for this presentation, the most important thing is that we exposed them with 8 politically related items. So on topics such as abortion, immigration, gay rights, etc. Every item had 5 different levels, ranging from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And in the way they are presented here, they're in such a way that the strongly disagree is always depicted in red and will identify the most Republican attitudes, while the strongly agree are always in dark blue and they will represent the mostly Democrat attitudes. Another interesting thing is that we collected self-identification. So we asked people, do you self-identify yourself as Democrat or Republican? And this would be useful only at the end of the presentation. So the analysis you will see in 2 seconds is only based on these 8 political items and nothing more. We only use this information for this analysis. Let's start with what we expected, because it's interesting to compare what we thought we were going to obtain and what we obtained, because it contains even more information than what we expected. So here for visual representation, I'm only using 3 items. Again, this is not real data. This is what we thought we would achieve. And we're expecting to observe some clusters. So each cluster should be, for example, for a level. So we would have a cluster of the strongly agree, which would be like the most hardcore Democrat. Then a cluster of the weakly agree, which would be like the in-between Democrat. Then the cluster of the neutral, etc., etc. So what we found was this figure here, which has something in common with the one before, but also is quite different. So let's start with what actually is the same. We can see here that we have the cluster of the strongly agree, as expected. So this is the mostly hardcore Democrat. And this other cluster is the strongly disagree one. So it's the mostly hardcore Republican attitudes. Also, we see there is this, they are at the extremes as expected. But what is surprising is actually what is happening in between. Because we see clearly that we have pretty much two clusters, the Democrat and the Republican. But what is surprising is that the Republican actually has a lot of more nodes than the Democrat one. Especially the neutral attitudes appear to be on the Republican side. And even three pale blue, so weakly agree attitudes, are on the Republican side. One of these, for example, is abortion should be legal, mildly agree. So ideally, this should be on the Democrat side. So when we found this, we were kind of skeptical. We didn't know exactly what was happening, and we thought it might be an artifact. So this group of attitudes should be actually on the wrong side. Maybe our method is wrong, is not doing the right thing. And we started looking for problems, but at the end, we start finding actually that this method was working fine. And we even start finding confirmation of this result. So here we have this new representation. And as you can see, the position of each node is exactly the same as before. So the positioning is still using our method. But for the colors, actually, we're also using the self-identification. So if a person considers himself or herself a Democrat or a Republican. So blue nodes are nodes for which people who select that node actually self-identify themselves more often as Democrat. While red nodes were mostly selected by people who self-identify themselves as Republican. So actually here what we observe is that the self-identification is telling us the same story. There is a split here, and even some attitudes like mildly agreeing on abortion are on the Republican side. So people who mildly agree on abortion are more often Republican than Democrats. So why is that? And it looks like Democrats seems to have a very clear positioning on some attitudes. So maybe on immigration they are not that straightforward. They also might mildly agree on some topics like immigration, but on topics like abortion they are really clear. So they mostly tend to strongly agree. And if you weakly agree, it's much more likely that you're a Republican. Another way to understand this is to use an example, and again, this one instead is not from real data. What we observed before it was, this one is not. And we might think about flat earthers, so people who think that Earth might be flat, or maybe it has a very weird shape which is not round, or maybe Earth is an hologram. Anyway, there is some kind of conspiracy to hide us the truth that Earth is something else from round. So if you ask people the item Earth is not flat, and you should either strongly agree, weakly agree, or strongly disagree, we have that all the non-flat earthers, so people who think that Earth is round, will strongly agree with this claim, like Earth is clearly not flat, we're sure about that, I strongly agree. While people who are more related to flat earthers probably will start having some alternative positioning, like being neutral or maybe weakly agreeing. So yeah, Earth maybe is not flat, but it's an hologram, so we have to take into account this. And so the thing is, if we use this for identification, we have that only one level of the item is going to identify non-flat earthers, while all the others are going to identify flat earthers. And it's probable that with Democrats and Republicans we observe something like this for abortion. Coming back to this, what I think is really interesting is that our method actually was able to tell us this information without having any access to self-identification. So just from the way information is distributed, just from the pattern of responses, our method was able to tell us like this tree actually belonged to this cluster. So if you mildly agree that abortion should be legal, then you are on the Republican side. So there are many other results that actually we can discuss, and probably we will have other videos on this. Most importantly, we have some preprints coming up soon. So if you're interested in any of these, feel free to reach us, contact us, or follow us on social media. We try to keep people updated as much as possible on this project. So thank you very much for listening, and see you next time.